When we talk about herbs, there's three very important attributes that I encourage everyone to think about. And the first attribute with every herb is whether it's inherently an upper, middle, or lower herb. Even if you have an herb that wasn't included in the Shandong Bancao or the Mingyi Bialu, we can understand the paradigm of those books and ask ourselves, is this an herb that we can use in large doses for long periods of time without harming the patient? Or is this a very powerful herb that we can only use for a short period of time? And that will really give us that answer and help us understand it in terms of matching the strength of our formula to the strength of the illness of the patient that we're seeing. The second question that I would like for us to always ask ourselves or focus on the attribute is the flavor and nature. And that's what all of these flavor nature tests or discussions are about, is to inspect the herb that we actually have on hand in the clinic at the moment and understand its particular nuances. If we practice a medicine based on the I Ching, we understand that there's tiny permutations and changes, even in ourselves from day to day, in the weather, in the foods that we cook, in the way that our plants grow. And those are things that we do understand in Chinese medicine and how they will affect the body. So we're tasting the herb we actually have on hand. We're seeing what the scholars that came before us said about it, and we're investigating the properties of the plant we have at this moment. That's a result from its unique location of growing, its climate while it was growing, its drying process, storage process, everything that happened to the herb until it is in the formula for our patient at that moment. And the third thing, the third attribute that is very important to focus on is the yin and the yang of the herb. And that is often as simple as holding the herb in your hand and looking at it. Is it dense? Is it very light and fluffy? Is it sticky? Does it have powder on it? The way that the plant acts in our body does relate to the way the plant is, its physicality, for lack of a better word, that relates to its yin and yang. So today I have Jiang, and I want to talk about Jiang because I was so excited when we tasted Jiang. Its flavor and nature were so obvious, palpable, and specific that I was really excited to film this video and talk to you all about Jiang. Now, Jiang has become a very popular substance recently, and a lot of patients are taking Jiang in terms of a pill. Here I have 25 grams of Jiang in my hand, and you can see how little these pieces are. It is a root substance, but these pieces are super small, light, very, very powdery. If I put all of this Jiang back on a piece of paper, I would have yellow powder on my hand. And so it has a quite yang lightness, tenderness, maybe delicate is a better word to it. Despite the fact that it's a root, it has this yang within the yin of it. And so that will help us understand how it's going to act in the body. It's not a yin within yin substance or an all the way yin substance. It has a lot of yang qualities to it because it is light. It's very vibrant yellow in quality. It's covered with this light powder and very small. So we can expect it to act in a more yang manner if we're looking at it and saying that it has a lot of yang qualities. Now, anytime that we look and inspect an herb, we do want to read about what the brilliant scholars of the past have said. And Jiang first appeared in the Tang Bancao. So it was not given an official designation of an upper, middle, or lower herb in the Shandong Bancao or the Mingyi Bialu. So it's really up for us to taste the herb. How powerful, how potent do we feel of a change with 10 grams or 25 grams or 50 grams? Because especially with Jiang, when our patients are taking it long term, whether it's as a supplement from a Whole Foods or some sort of health food store, or it's something that's in a formula for a long time, we need to be really clear. And Jiang is something that I think many of our patients are taking on their own daily, months and months and months, if not years. So we need to make sure that it is safe for them to do so. We also need to make sure what we're putting into our formula because we could be giving them duplicate herbs based on what supplements they take. So since we don't know for sure that perhaps someone smarter than we are said, oh, this is an upper herb or a lower herb, we just need to take that into account and see what we think. Today we're tasting 25 grams of Jiang. Now, certainly it is true that because of our experience in China and in Beijing, our prescription habits are not aligned with the kinds of doses you will see in English language prescription books, formula books. 25 grams of Jiang is a pretty standard dose for us in the clinic. I will say that with that dose, we do notice very, very immediate differences. Immediately people coming back and saying that their body pain in particular is less severe. And it's an herb that when it's out of stock, I always am very disappointed that it's out of stock because it does work so well and the results are so obvious that to substitute for a different herb sometimes becomes difficult. Are we choosing Wailing Xian or Qinjiu or Sumu, or how are we getting that light acrid property, that lightness, that flowing and moving in a different substance? Now, flavor and nature is a very interesting conversation with Jiang because in the Bancao Gongmu, we're told that Jiang is acrid and bitter and greatly cold. That's really important to take into account if someone is taking it long term, especially if we have an older patient, someone, particularly maybe a 70-year-old woman who's very thin, especially if you're not living in the tropics, taking something that was said to be greatly cold every day for a long time may not create damage from Monday to Tuesday, but just affecting the thermal sensations of the patient just enough that maybe after 3 months of taking it, 6 months of taking it, they may find that their body systemically is working less well because they've thermally shifted. Now, the Bancao Zhengyi says that Jiang is bitter, acrid, and hot. So this is a great reminder that while people often want to make Chinese medicine very scientific and very standardized, we are using plants that came from different locations, different growing experiences, each season, even in the same location, different periods of time in history. Now, when you see one herb being labeled as greatly cold and the same herb labeled as hot, I hope that that does trigger us to inspect and see what we think. Chen Cangqi said actually the nature of this herb is warming and not cold, and he actually says those who state that Jiang is greatly cold are greatly mistaken. So not only do we have differing opinions, we have someone in there saying you're all wrong. So we should pay attention. Here is the Jiang that I brewed in a double-walled insulated thermos, 1.5 liters of water overnight. This is the method that we do have a majority of our patients using to prepare their prescriptions. It is compliance almost 100%. It really is the best of getting long soaking times for roots and things that need long soaking times without ever overboiling anything that's more aromatic that sometimes is described as being at the end herb. So that's a method that we use, and therefore that's the method that we're going to use to taste our single herbs so that we can be clear on how we would change that prescription for our patients. So the smell is very obviously turmeric. It has a little bit of a powdery, maybe bittery, almost kind of stick to the sides of your nose, acidy smell. The liquid is clear, but I don't know that I don't feel like looking from one side of the glass to the other. I can see my fingers. So there's a little bit of maybe sediment or sort of turbidity. The dust, that yellow powder that's on the outside of the Jiang, looking at it, I can see that that's in here a little bit so that I can't completely see through my glass. The liquid is actually quite thin in my mouth, and it tastes a little bit like water, and then the very last bit almost kind of slides across my tongue with a little bit of a bitterness, very much a representative taste that we would expect of turmeric if you cook a lot with turmeric. It has a little bit of that powdery sits down on my tongue a little bit. And actually, the longer after I swallow, it's becoming slightly aromatic. And so the first noticeable experience is bitter, slightly descending, not a bitter drying, but a sort of coat the tongue a little bit, go like this. And then after that settles, I feel a slight aroma in my mouth and in my nose and in my throat. That's pleasant. It means that instead of drinking something bitter and kind of doing this afterwards, there's a kind of experience to it. So as I sit here just in the minute after drinking this, what's interesting is I can actually feel a breeze from around the room on my hands, a little bit even on my legs, on my skin right here where my shirt isn't covering. But what's interesting is it's very noticeably different from here. I almost feel as if there's some warmth on my neck and on my shoulders, as if I had more clothes on up here and can feel the breeze there. And I mentioned how excited I was to brew and discuss Jiang, and that's because drinking it in the clinic, we had that experience, and with interns that were in the clinic, we were all able to immediately track a sensation of this liquid of Jiang went in our mouths and almost spread directly across our shoulders, across our neck, kind of out here, which is wonderful because if we read in English language books, action books of herbs, it says that Jiang treats the shoulder. And that's always been something I've wondered about, if it's because Jiang was included in a prescription with herbs that was famous for treating the shoulder, maybe scattering cold out of a joint. But actually, Jiang is so noticeably settling here, and that's kind of that bitter, powdery feeling I had, and then that secondary slight lightening. It's almost like it spreads here and stops. One of the interns in the clinic mentioned that they thought it was very interesting. They would not be inclined to use Jiang for problems of the lower body, the hips or the knees, as much as they would for the shoulders because of this so noticeable, not an esoteric, maybe I feel it, but obvious warmth and spreading here. So Jiang is fairly famously known as this idea of enlivening the blood, stopping pain, creating this flow. And the Yaoxing Fu tells us that it's appropriate for things like blood stasis and qi stagnation in this area of heart, abdomen, and chest. And I would agree that the Jiang we are tasting today, that we have in the clinic at this moment, does have a feeling that it will palpably flow and even warm a little bit this region. If you read a lot about Jiang you're going to find it compared to Yujin and to Eju. And so the comparison is that Yujin is bitter and cold, able to descend and drain, whereas Jiang is enlivening and warm, therefore it's creating movement and dispersal. And I think that that's a very important thing, again, to pay attention to, especially if somebody is taking an herb long term. Even if you didn't want to warm them up on purpose or cool them down on purpose, if somebody takes an herb that has a slightly warming or slightly cooling property, over time, that property is going to sort of nudge them away from a homeostasis or a balanced temperature. The Bancao Gongmu compares Jiang with Yujin and Eju and says that they're similar in form and application, but Yujin enters the heart and treats the blood. Jiang enters the spleen and therefore can move the qi, while Eju enters the liver. The Yaoxing Sibai Wei is a great book to look at because it provided a very short, memorizable, concise statement about 400 herbs, and it's called the Yaoxing, so the qualities of, or the sort of the nature, the complete nature of an herb for 400 herbs. And so the Yaoxing Sibai Wei tells us that Jiang flavor is acrid, and it can dissolve abscesses and sores and break apart blood, treating knotting in this heart to abdomen region. So the comments, the translated comments about
Jiang are here on the page for you all to look at and reference. My initial feeling of Jiang was great excitement over its palpable kind of spreading and moving action over to the shoulders. I did not feel that it palpably descended. If it needs to be aimed at directing to the hips or the knees or the feet, anywhere kind of lower, I feel like it would need to be paired with something to help guide it that way, something that's heavier in nature. That's the beauty of looking at the yin and the yang of the herb, is I feel this Jiang is particularly yang in quality, in the sense that it is both very light and very thin, and its flavors are quite thin. The bitter is very, very mild, like I said, almost as if it's just slight powder going on the mouth. Doesn't linger, doesn't do this in response. That slightly acrid, lifting, lightening sensation, also fairly yang in quality. And then the fact that we did feel a slight warming sensation here. Today, I'm drinking Jiang room temperature, whereas in the clinic we were drinking it warm. And the warming sensation, I'm even having that difference of, I can feel the difference in cold air on my arms here. I don't feel like there's actually any breeze or cold air here. So I can't say I necessarily feel warmer, but I don't feel a breeze. In the clinic, drinking the Jiang warm, I palpably felt warmth spreading, and it was almost like someone had done a Jedi mind trick on us all. We all kind of went, that's weird. It was so specific and so incredible in that action. So do get some Jiang, brew it, and see what you think.